Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Horror Hour. I'm one of the co hosts here, Yutaka. Hello. And today I had the honor of getting to sit down and talk with Simon Barrett. Let that sink in. Yeah. Simon Barrett. Yeah. You're next, the guest, VHS, VHS 2, and now his directorial debut, which he also wrote, Seance, drops tomorrow on Shudder. And then a week later, VHS 94, which he also directed a segment. So stick around for the interview. Bye. I'm Yutaka. I'm with the Horror Hour. My co-host Ben and George couldn't be with us today. I got them to partake in a seance and haven't actually heard of them since, so I'm okay with that.
To be honest, I don't really like those guys.
That works for me.
Yeah, I was gonna say something. I was actually gonna tell the PR company that kind of but so it's good. I didn't have time, so this worked out really perfectly for me.
Well, I mean, us Missourians have to stick together, so.
Oh yeah, I didn't even know that they weren't from Missouri. I mean, if I'd known that, I actually might have refused to do this whole interview. So I'm glad actually that just came up now.
All right. Well, I appreciate you being here. And so we're here to really actually talk about a couple things. Seance, which was you wrote, and it's your directorial debut, which I actually saw back in, I want to say May when it actually was released.
Nice.
And then
that's the right time to have seen it.
I unfortunately here in Missouri, some things were closed, but I was thankful to see it on PVOD. I would have seen this in theaters. I'm more of the casual moviegoer, and this is one I've already actually seen 6-7 times now. But
thank you. Well, it's actually a point of I'm personally a little disappointed that I wasn't actually able to get a Missouri screening for Seance together. It was a specific failure of the pandemic. Usually I can twist like Ragtag's arm in Columbia, but this time I was like, all right, you guys are busy. I did, however, attend a screening in Kansas City right over the border.
This would have been actually great to see on the big screen. And actually, before we start, I'm a huge dog person, so I have to ask actually how Hazel is doing. I follow you on Twitter. I saw she had knee surgery.
She's right here. This is her.
Oh.
She's on crate. Right? She doesn't like to. If I leave the room, since she's locked in her crate on the surgery thing, she doesn't like that. So I'm keeping her out. I'm basically wheeling her in, but we can't put her in a normal crate because she'll chew it until she hurts her gums. So we have to put her in this like industrial box. But it's great because I can just like literally, it's like having like a turtle. I can just like wheel her from room to room. Yeah, and I assume this is the interview. I assume we already started.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just want to kind of break the ice that one, I'm a little nervous, and who knows.
No, all good.
With this film, I have to ask though, because again, I really enjoyed this movie. But how was your experience directing this, since this is your first big directorial? This is your big.
Well, I mean, Seance was a real challenge for me. It wasn't like we had a totally tiny amount of resources on the film. It was a 22-day shooting schedule, which is tight, but not absurd. But because we had so many locations, because we weren't actually able to find a school that was willing to accommodate us once they read the script. It ended up being one of those indie film shoots that's just like you realize going into it like it's going to be tough. You've bitten off more than you can chew, and obviously I had experienced doing that with like Your Next and working on things with Adam, especially at the beginning kind of our careers. So I wasn't like stressed about it, but because that's just what movie making is. You kind of set in your mind the absolute minimum you think you can make a film for, and then subtract usually about 20%, and that's what you're going to get. And it's true. So you just have to make compromises. That's just the economic realities of filmmaking. Like no one's going to give you the budget you want. They want to give you the least amount they think they can possibly get a commercial product from, generally. Which makes financial sense, but can lead to bad cinema from time to time. With Seance, yeah, I mean, I knew it was going to be a challenge going into it, and I hadn't really worked with anyone involved in the film before. Just because of kind of how things ended up working out. It was all new people. I was in a new place. Winnipeg, and just working with a completely new crew and team of kind of producers and stuff. And that's just how the project ended up coming together. And ultimately you're responsible for kind of everything in a situation like that. And it was challenging, and it was stressful, but I mean, I did find it creatively really satisfying and exciting. I mean, I guess that's the simplest answer is, it was stressful and it was a lot of work, even more, than I expected going into it with my experience, hands-on producing, a lot of really small films, films with smaller budgets than Seance even, but nonetheless, like I did get everything I wanted from it. I was kind of able to, I enjoyed the process of being able to be really creative visually in a way that like there's no point in me trying to contribute to that stuff kind of when Adam is directing, because he just has his own kind of vision for projects,
Mhm.
and I usually agree with it. But it is nice to be able to do your own thing sometimes. And I ultimately, would love to do it again. But it was tough. It was a lot of work.
I mean, the product itself, I really, I guess I couldn't tell that it was that much, of a challenge for you, because again, I've seen it so many times because I just enjoy it. Because uh, growing up, there was just one thing in our household. You just don't mess with either Ouija boards or like in seances, anything like that. And so I kind of get like the heebie-jeebies. So going into it, I was like, well, I'm already a little unsettled. And come to find out, though, certain scenes like the hallways are being so tight and the rooms are so tiny, is that I also felt claustrophobic, which again, I love when a film can just elevate my heart rate. And that's what I felt I was getting with this film. And then you added the bits of comedy. And also, I think Suki was just an absolute delight. She was, anytime she was on screen, I was just smiling just because of her line delivery, along with Madison Beatty. I mean, I really enjoyed your cast in this film.
It's interesting. It's interesting the things that you decide as a director to like choose realism for, because you mentioned the kind of claustrophobia of the setting, and once we realized we weren't going to be allowed to film in any actual dorms, and I figured out that probably, or I should say my production designer, Marlena Fihiri, or Mars is how she goes by in the film. She really figured out that the best thing for us to do is probably build a dorm room that we could use for every dorm setting, and then marry that to a hallway in a bank building, in an abandoned bank building that we figured out kind of aesthetically looked like
Oh,
a dorm
wow.
hallway. The problem with that hallway is it was just simply too narrow. So it was hard. I couldn't really put extras kind of walking up and down the hallway, because you'd have to like have the actors like get out of their way, and then it would be like a bit of distracting blocking of like, why did they interrupt the scene with that. So I'm aware that some of the scenes feel kind of unnaturally sparse at times, but what I liked about it was that I didn't go to private school or anything. I went to college, and I lived in a dorm for a short period, but I was always kind of bothered by I just had never really seen a film capture like the shittiness of a dorm room, and just like how small and generally really depressing they are.
Yeah, that's very
And
true.
that was something Marlena, she really went out and like found the actual like maximum kind of measurements for a dorm, or like realistically that a dorm room would be. And then it became an argument with Kareem Hussein, our cinematographer on the project, wonderful DP, who we're shooting this movie anamorphic, which means you need a lot of distance for your lenses. You're kind of doubling the length, the distance you need whenever you're shooting anamorphic, and so it's really hard to be uptight against the actors, but it kind of led us to have to embrace using kind of wide lenses, because I agreed with Marlena. It's like we can't make these spaces unrealistically large, but I
Mhm.
also agreed with Kareem, which is like, wait, how are we putting a camera on tracks in this room? There's no space for it. So so it was fun. I mean, that was actually probably part of the film that I got to most like design, just that, even though again, we didn't have the resources to do much, and this build wasn't taking place on a soundstage but in an abandoned section of a storage facility. but but I mean, you make it work. But yeah, I liked that felt to me realistic to being in school. However, the funny thing is, there's of course many things about Seance that are not realistic, including like the actors and also well, the actors' performances are realistic, but the stylization of them is a little heightened.
Yeah.
And and they don't plug their phones in and stuff like that. But but it like things like that I feel like don't matter so much in a movie like this, but getting the rooms right does. If everyone had these like opulent movie dorm rooms, I think that would feel very fairly like ersatz. It just wouldn't be right.
Well, I quite liked it because again, you really also got to focus on the cast and the story. It really added to that element, and like I said, I claustrophobic, and again, just loved that. And I guess I'd also like to ask about those masks because those were creepy, and I want to know what kind of, because I remember obviously the masks in Your Next, also just one of my favorite films, but this one was kind of just almost like disformed or disfigured, and I was just like, it was just creepy to see them come out with it. I'm like, ooh.
Again, it's this like weird as a director you find out kind of what your personal sensibility is, and I kind of like to adhere to realism in like a few things that matter, and one thing that always mattered to me is in horror movies I felt like they were scarier if it really made sense to me how the killer like actually would be wearing their mask, or I guess like how to put this. It's like I think the Michael Myers mask is so great because it does just kind of feel like something a crazy guy would find in a store and put on, and it would be scary, but it also feels real. But some masks are so stylized that I mean, I just saw Patrick Bryce's movie, There's Someone Inside Your House, and there's the killer in that film 3D prints
Oh, I saw.
their masks. I won't spoil anything, but they actually make a joke of how elaborate it is, which I thought was clever. But it's one of those things where I wanted the masks to feel like they were made by teenagers with little resources. And we had them made again. Mars Feehery arranged this. They were made by a local mask maker in Winnipeg, who I never actually was able to directly interact with. I just like understood that we had very little time, and there was like one person, so I was just like, okay. And that was what I got back, and I was like, all right, this is it. So I think I had like one notes pass, and I had him enlarge the eyes a little bit because originally I thought they were actually kind of unsafe for the actors to be wearing. I mean, that's a problem when you cast movies with masks, that I think the audience doesn't think about. I mean, for example, in Your Next, L.C. Holt, who plays the lamb mask killer, he could barely see. And and he's kind of climbing in and out of windows with that mask on, because it was those little narrow, we cut those little narrow slits in the eyes, so it would look kind of like goat eyes. That was just an aesthetic that Tom Hammack and Adam and I thought was cool. Tom was the production designer on Your Next. And so the masks in Seance like were a little dangerous, like with what the characters are doing with them on, in those fight scenes and such. It's much harder if you can only see a narrow little piece of just directly in front of yourself. So that was basically that was what I got. I was like, yeah, can you make the eyes a little bigger? And then I was like, okay, he's done. So I assume we paid him very, very, very little. But I like that aesthetic. I think it kind of does feel, it again feels real to what they would actually be able to do. And I like that it like is almost endearingly sloppy and shitty, and I think that's kind of interesting. So I like that. I mean, the cast, I think also, you mentioned Madison Beatty and Suki, and both of whom I think are just amazing and loved working with, like, and I can get into specifics, but I think when they saw the mask, they were kind of like, okay, like, what's the tone of this? And I was like, yeah, we're figuring it
out. I actually also have to say, with thinking of Suki, and then I also think of also Sharni Vincent as well. I really enjoy how you've written. We see our normal final girls, but these two are just as soon as you meet them, there's just something different about them. They're smart, they're strong, and they're willing just to hop into danger. And I think just the one difference with Camille Meadows, though, is I loved that snarkiness. And I'm curious, was that part of your writing, or did Suki kind of add to that?
There's an interesting, you said something interesting in there, which is, I don't personally like it in movies when characters are too, like, I don't know how to phrase it, like too just like pointlessly aggressive towards other characters.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain type of snark that I think people sometimes insert into characters, especially in horror films, where they're just trying to kind of generate conflict because they're just kind of told that that's what a movie needs.
Mm-hmm.
And what it can result in is characters that are just like pettily bickering about things that the audience has no investment in, and it can be very I think distancing for most viewers, and I'm sure you can think of millions of examples. So it's tricky because but what they're kind of getting at is something that I think overall can be good, which is you kind of do want your main character to be like a little bit ahead of the rest of the characters and a little bit ahead of the audience, and to have a bit of a chip on their shoulder. Just because, and especially in kind of a revenge horror, which, in different ways is kind of what Seance and Your Next are both kind of doing at certain times. I tend to be attracted to kind of vengeance cinema. Particularly, I think, like, most of my influences are that kind of like Hong Kong cinema of the 80s and 90s, and that's really what inspired me the most. And like most of the filmmakers that I really get along with, kind of like Adam and Gareth Evans, people who I admire, we all kind of grew up speaking the same cinematic language of those films. Because that was definitely the most interesting filmmaking going on, when I was kind of becoming aware of what cinema really is as a teenager, and how I wanted to try to make it. At any rate, just kind of getting back to like your main question, that kind of snarky or sarcastic humor, I think, can actually be very off-putting if it's just done without a purpose or a direction.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I think, like, a key, something that I think works better is if you have a character that you kind of show has reason,
Mm-hmm.
to be a bit put upon. In other words, I personally really like rooting for characters who are underdogs.
Mm-hmm.
I find that very appealing. But it's interesting, like, you see that in a lot of like anime, but you don't see that in a ton of like Western narratives. I don't know why. Like in Hollywood movies, we kind of want our heroes sometimes to already be successful. It's like actors want to be too cool or something.
It doesn't make them real when they're like that.
I just don't relate to it. I can't relate to someone who's not a bit damaged. And I'm just not, like, I'm not sure I'm just like interested in taking that journey. I mean, look, whatever, like, do I like Marvel movies? Yeah, I like some of them. I don't have a great pull quote for that. They're fine.
Well, you mentioned anime, so I'm.
Well, I mean, I can definitely shit all over like some beloved ones if we want to get a good headline. But like, with going back to Suki, one of the things that made me really want to work with her specifically on Seance, and I think it's slightly different in terms of Sharni Vincent in Your Next, but I think, I had a similarly great experience working with her. Like, neither one of them was kind of afraid of looking a little bit foolish or silly. Like, in other words, they both understood that if they tried to look cool from the very start, it wouldn't actually be cool. And that, like, tough people don't act tough. They just steadily reveal their toughness if the circumstances require it. And that's much more, I think, compelling and effective than just having your characters be, pointlessly, off-putting, or have, just like chips on their shoulders that the audience doesn't even understand from like the beginning of scene one. And again, I can think of a lot of horror films and recent ones that have done this. It's just a way of generating, I guess, sparks on screen. But to me, those sparks are just irritating if I don't know what the character's, real vibe is, and what their kind of energy is, and why they feel that way. So Suki really got that, and she was not afraid, to appear clumsy, ridiculous, absurd, et cetera, kind of whatever the scene called for, because I think she understood that ultimately, the character would be more fun that way if the character wasn't just like one note. And we let her coolness kind of feel more earned as the film goes on.
I mean, and I won't spoil anything, and I'll be honest, I spoil a lot of things for myself, but I didn't see the twists coming at the end. And I think that's part of, again, why I really enjoyed it. But then I think that's also what made Suki's character just more like, I won't say the line, but I remember when a line was uttered and my jaw just hit the floor. I'm like, I didn't piece that together. Holy shit. That was incredible. I really loved it. I was like,
yeah, there's I guess like some people have said, and I think some people have said this as like a negative thing, as a negative criticism of the film, that Seance is like a bit of a tip of the iceberg movie where it's like we're hinting at a more interesting story and we're showing, and actually there's even more hints where if like you look like really freeze frame some of the letters she's flipping through, it kind of implies a bit more of a dark history and how specifically Carrie might have helped the Camille character out and what their back history might have been. That's a spoiler, but whatever. People watching the movie won't be able to track what I just said.
That's okay. I didn't take it as a negative. I really enjoyed it. So
no, I mean, I like doing murder mysteries, but what I was gonna say is like, I think of that like quote from like there's like a Y song that's like a sometimes simple on the surface means a complex structure underneath, like straight laced tennis shoes. Hip hop artist Y. He was from the Oakland Anticon Collective, so he said just like weird poetic things like that. I always had that in my mind for like Suki's character. It's like we're gonna present her like totally straightforward, like a kind of Clint Eastwood rides into town, like at the beginning of the Western, like that's her character, and we're just gonna like have her. She's just gonna be on a weird mission, but only she knows what it is. And even at the end of the movie, the audience should be kind of like a little confused by her mission and how she got there. I don't know. I know some people feel like it's very silly, but I personally really do enjoy twists like that, and I think hinting at that kind of stuff can be really fun. And and I had honestly, I had financing producers on this project that were willing to trust me that really bizarre choice was a good one. And I know some people definitely aren't into it, and also furthermore, I think there's a valid criticism that I've kind of done it a little bit before. The character that just like turns out to like be a little tougher than you'd expect, and that's a fair criticism. I'm probably not going to stop doing that, but I'm going to do it in a different way.
Well, again, I really enjoyed her character. I just enjoyed the movie.
Yeah, I'm really happy. Thank you so much. It does. It's really gratifying to hear, especially that you watched it more than once, because it is one of those things where like it's a murder mystery. You never know. Like do they hold up to repeat viewings is a tough question. But it's also I brought my dog in here so she wouldn't bark during the interview, but she's starting to snore.
It's okay.
So anyway, yeah, she's well, now she heard me say dog, so she's awake. I forgot what I was talking about.
That's all right. I do want to, since we have a little bit of time left, I also want to talk about VHS 94, because that also I just finished this morning, and wow. There's something I would love a couple things. What convinced you to come back to the series? And I'm actually happy they took it back to the 90s, but also just as somebody growing up in St. Louis or Tornado Alley, your segment just really was like, oh, this hits on so many different levels. Just the sights and then the sounds. Ooh.
Yeah, I really want to talk about the tornado of it all, because a very funny thing about this that I discovered is, we made this up in Toronto, or actually Burlington, Ontario, during it was actually filmed in a bubble.
Okay.
One of those intense productions, because Ontario was on full lockdown then. It was actually really hard to get like costumes and props and like meet crew and stuff. I never met my costume designer on this film.
Oh wow.
Although I specifically hired her like just for my segment and like like it was complicated, but yeah. But what I discovered is that people up in Canada like don't really even understand what tornadoes are. And then I furthermore discovered that people in Los Angeles don't really understand what they are. So I actually so my sound team on this are Jeff Pitts and Andy Hayes, the sound mixer. Jeff Pitts is my sound editor. They worked on Seance, they worked on Blair Witch, they worked on The Guest, that like longtime collaborators. The only people actually that I was able to bring on to Seance that I'd worked with before. And they, of course, came on to do VHS 94 and work with all the directors. But I really had to be like, No, like there's a haunting quality, because when I was a little kid, you remember being like woken up, and if you're lucky. So I grew up, I lived in a little bit in the kind of like a duplex on like a trailer park where we did not have a basement. Actually, a couple of places I lived with my sister, and I lived with my mom. And after my parents got divorced, my mom lived in a couple of places that did not have basements. They were like these kind of, trailers basically. And as you know, trailer parks and tornadoes,
They don't mix.
not a good mix. Not a good mix. So I remember growing up being like specifically terrified of like hearing that siren, that like wail, and you just get like a sick feeling in your stomach, because when you're a little kid, stuff that's so outside of your control feels really truly terrifying. So it's like people out here have like I know I have a few friends who grew up out here in California, and they get really freaked out by earthquakes, whereas I'm just like, oh, we're but I don't have any frightening associations with it yet. Knock on wood, I guess I should say. But with tornadoes, I do remember being at like my junior high school and watching the roof get lifted off a Pizza Hut, across the street from us during a tornado. Like I really do remember like the sky turning like that dark purple, and you're like, whoa. So I wanted to do a tornado horror movie, and then I made it with like no people that knew what a tornado was, what that siren was supposed to sound like, what even how even a tornado hitting a window, how it even looks. Because that's something I'd seen in person. So there's a lot about the design of the tornado in my segment that like I really specifically, massaged.
I felt it. I was just like, man, I was like, I haven't seen that in a horror film in a very long time, but I know it. I mean, you are correct. I have always had the I guess luxury of a basement, but I remember being parents waking us up and like, we need to get to the basement.
Well, yeah. And then you do, if you do have the luxury of a basement, which ultimately my mom did move into a house where she still lives, and then you really get rushed into the basement. It's terrifying too. You're like hiding it. You're sitting in the basement waiting to see if your house is like taken away and you're gonna die.
Oh my God. And then we grew up with pets, and that was always like, where's our dog? Where are they? Oh, yeah. And you gotta make, oh man.
Gotta get the cats down here. If they're outdoor cats, you don't know where they are. You're like, am I ever gonna see the cat again? Yeah, no, it's intense. But it's funny. I mean, that's not a universal experience. So I one of the reasons we didn't actually specifically set You're Next at Thanksgiving, which has been a question I've been asked over the years, is because we were like, well, they don't have Thanksgiving in other countries. And it's also like a holiday that people here, I think, feel very conflicted about. So, yes. So why would we limit the audience of this film so completely, if we could possibly get it in front of international viewers, which ultimately we were able to do. So with VHS 94, I kind of just wanted people to understand that it was like a windstorm, but I'm actually not. So I'm worried that people don't even know what tornadoes are. In like parts of the world, but whatever, it's.
Well, I think those of us in the Midwest will. I mean,
it's a movie for the Midwesterners.
Well, I mean, and I do want to say that I'm excited that both of these are going to Shudder. I think they're going to have a wonderful audience there. And actually, it's looking at it, Seance drops tomorrow, and then VHS 94 is October 6th.
1 week later.
I can't wait for people to see it. And I've been really happy to see everybody's response from Fantastic Fest. I'm so jealous of everyone that got to go to that, because that looked amazing. And films.
In answer to kind of the first half of the question you'd asked, the thing that brought me back, because I to be honest, I did not have a desire to do another one of these, and which is why I was not involved in the third one. At that point, Adam and I were so sick of them, and I think producer Roxanne Benjamin bailed around that time as well, that we were just like, give our points to Brad Miska and Zach Seaman. They deserve them, and you guys are on your own. And because we had points in a third movie, because we had points in the second film, and then we were like, nah, you can keep those. And we were really done. I'd wanted to continue the kind of wraparound story that I've been building, but just after doing them two of them back to back, I just had no creative interest. And there were a couple things that really appealed to me. First was being offered a segment to direct, which I had not done before. And by the time the movie was reaching the point where it was getting real, was an idea that excited me. But then secondarily, it was the team that was involved. I mean, I was excited, of course, to work with Brad Miska, again, he's a buddy, but like, it was also like when I was like, oh, so like David Bruckner's back, Radio Silence are back, we've all been friends since the first movie. Plus Timo was attached, and at that time Chloe Okuno, who I was excited to work with because I'd seen her short film that she made a few years prior. And so I was kind of like, okay, this is a really good group, and I would be really foolish to turn this down, especially because, by the time, again, it was getting real, it was kind of like, oh, well, we're filming, which on one hand was a nightmare and really stressful and really presented a lot of challenges that I could not have predicted. That every day it felt like nearly broke us completely as a film. Oh, wow. Like it felt like every day you were fighting to save the movie, that level of indie film stress. But nonetheless, we had fairly decent budgets, so we could actually afford the kind of gore prosthetics that we'd never really been able to do before on these movies, even though, the earlier films tried to be, with the exception, of course, of Gareth Evans and Tjahjanto, Safe Haven, they were able to, but they I think they literally spent their own money finishing that movie. I mean, I know they did.
The gore was wow.
I think they went into their own pockets to finish Safe Haven and VHS2, which actually I feel terrible about. They shouldn't have had to do that, but that's just the kind of filmmakers they are. They just can't not deliver. So but with the exception of those guys, we were always struggling with really kind of low budgets, and the budget was higher on this one. The creative team was there, and then once Ryan Prows, I was a huge fan of Low Life, so and Jennifer Reeder, it was just the team was really good. Jennifer, I'd been on a jury with in the year prior, so I thought she was really cool. So it was just I couldn't not do that. When I heard everyone that was going to be involved, I would have I would have felt left out. But I also set out to do something. I was like, okay, I kind of get what everyone's going to go for. I know you can't compete with Timo in terms of the horror action stuff. You just can't. Don't try. So I was like, I'm going to go for something that I think is more uniquely my sensibility, something that's a little more old fashioned and a little more it's not so much the slapstick of, say, Ryan's segment, which I love to pieces, Terror. But there's some really overt comedy in Ryan's. I mean, I remember reading the script and being like, okay, so this is kind of white supremacist Monty Python. I was like, okay, I mean, I love it. Don't get me wrong. This is exactly the right choice. But obviously this is going to divide some people, and it is, but that's what the VHS movies have always been somewhat confrontational, in the sense that we would embrace our low budgets as an opportunity to do things that we otherwise wouldn't be allowed to get away with.
Well, it's honestly, it's fantastic. And I know we went a little bit over. So again, I just want to say thank you. This was a wonderful opportunity. I hope everyone, again, I love Shudder. And I just think it's just a perfect place for both of these. So
thank you so much. Yeah, we got off to a late start because it means this worked out perfect.
This was honestly, it was a pleasure. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
You have been listening to the Horror Hour. See you next time.